Click that like and subscribe button and go sign up on superchargedstocks.com and let's keep you notified. Good morning, everyone. It's Andrew with Supercharged Stocks, and today is a very special day for me because I'm able to talk to Dr. Marc Faber, and he needs no introduction, but a little quick background. I mean, Dr. Faber got his degree back, a PhD, in economics back when he was 24 in Zurich, Switzerland, in Geneva. And without going through the entire career, rose up to managing director at Drexel Burnham Lambert in Hong Kong, which really, if I put this into a sports analogy, is kind of like you're reaching the Olympic levels. If you're able to hit the highest level of investment banking and trading and become a managing director, that's serious work and commitment and time and knowledge. He's had no end to success with predicting the future and looking at things. And I would say mostly because of such a firm and strong conviction in understanding history, the past, literature, and using that along with all sorts of other models to guide us forward. Of course, he has his report, which has been running for years now, which is the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, which I strongly encourage someone to read, because not only are you giving incredible insights into stocks, but more importantly, I see this as the level of education you're going to get because you're pulling out so many incredible writers and philosophers and thinkers to help remind us that a lot of the things that we see as being new or this has never happened before is that, yes, a lot of these events that are happening today have happened before. A lot of these themes have happened before. We're human beings after all. So this is a huge discussion. I wanted to center it around, commodities and precious metals, but also with the emergence of crypto and just get that whole understanding of where we're at today, this idea of value and where we should be looking for our money and what do you see moving forward. Thank you so much, Dr. Faber, being here. Looking forward to learning some things. So good morning, Dr. Faber. It's a real pleasure to have you back with us. I thought today we'd jump back into a quote that you would put on your subscription that, once again, I urge people to subscribe to. It's from the economist Carl Gunnar Myrdal, and it's in regards to tax policy decisions, but it's a great quote, and it's, one has to know precisely what one is doing, lest the results diverge greatly from one's intentions. I think this is a good starting point to have a bit of a discussion on a few things that are happening in the world.
Yes, that's the issue about all economic interventions. And by the way, I've written recently quite a lot about military interventions, specifically the war in Vietnam, how it came about, and how it then was enlarged and how it finished not exactly gloriously. And the same for Afghanistan. I think bureaucrats, one of the main problems of bureaucrats and governments is, unlike an entrepreneur who has a business and he owns the business, he's very careful about anything he does because his money is on the line. But anyway, the point is, government officials are not punished for wrong decisions. They can go into a war, they can declare war in Afghanistan, and it's not the rich people that suffer. The rich people make money from wars. Government officials make money from wars. But the guy who is a decent fellow, he's in the army for whatever reason. Some are in the army because they're patriots. Most of the people go to the army because of a career within the army and so forth. But still, these are the people that eventually suffer. And what history books never tell you is the unbelievable sufferings of civilians.
Yes.
When you have the American army fighting in Vietnam, the locals are really slaughtered, and the same applied to Afghanistan, the local population. That is most of them completely innocent, because then on either side, they're just caught in the middle. They are the ones that suffer the most. And for these crimes, these government officials never get punished. And I always say, an entrepreneur, say you have a business and you make an investment decision to build a new machinery or acquire land and so forth. At some point, if it doesn't work out, you take your loss, because you know that at some point you own the whole business will be at a loss. But the government doesn't think that way. When they are losses, they think they didn't do enough. And government decisions are driven mostly by, do I look good in the eyes of the public? You can't run a business based on, do I look good? Nobody who has a good business can run it. Do I look good? This is a complete nonsense. But the whole world now is run by people who want to get elected, who have to look good in the eyes of the majority.
Yes.
This is a recipe. And I repeat this is the recipe for complete disaster.
I think people are not fully admitting to themselves that level, and I don't want to say incompetence, but certainly this desire to say the right things, to be liked, to then win an election, but then possibly in many cases the person has absolutely no expertise in the background that should be how to run a country, an economy. And it's you've got people saying very proper things and appropriate things, but unaware of how things actually work.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to talk negatively about people who died or are dead, but Donald Rumsfeld was a complete failure from the beginning to the end. He is a model example of how failures are pushed upwards.
Yes, and that's a huge, arms push, and there's lots of money to be made there. And the one thing I liken it to is that when you have no skin in the game, say if it was like, we're talking medieval times and it's ancient Vikings and whatnot, you would go to war with your family members, with your grandfather, with your brothers and sisters. You had skin in the game because you were going on the front line to fight. Now it's, I just have to convince someone else for you to put your sons and daughters in harm's way, and then I'll profit from it either way of the outcome, which is not the same model.
Absolutely. Alexander the Great, he was in the front line when he went to battles. On one battle at the river in India, his horse was killed, means he was relatively close to the front. So, I mean, this is what you said is absolutely true. The great military leaders were frequently at the front. Napoleon wasn't at the front in the last few battles, but in the first few battles, he was at the front.
And that's a good analogy for your interests are completely aligned. And whenever they're not, if your interests are not aligned with, even if it's a company, a corporation, a fund, or a government, if they aren't aligned, then one has to question, okay, what's your motivation? If mine's very different, and we don't have that same risk profile, problems occur.
I mean, my question today in the US is actually, I was just thinking about this because I may write about this in future. So far, the Biden administration rather looks as having the intention to destroy the United States. Yeah. Honestly, I mean, the appointments he's making and the way the government decides about things, you really think sometimes, do they have the interest of the United States as a country in mind? Or do they want to have social justice for the whole world and let the whole world settle in the United States, and let the American spirit become like Venezuela.
Yes.
Some people seem to like to have a country like Venezuela, because once the country is like Venezuela, I can guarantee you nobody will go to the US anymore.
No, and that's just in the news today as well. They fixed their currency problem by removing 6 zeros. I'm being facetious, but that was just yesterday. Is that, I mean, that's the situation that happens. Is that that's the inevitable outcome.
I mean, this is like, if it, as a moral person, it's tragic, but if you watch it, it's actually almost comic.
Yeah,
and then they blame other people for it, the Chinese and Putin, and if these don't work, it's someone else again, and so forth. That is horrible.
It is such a strange time that one has to not preclude the ideas that is this done on purpose, because the decision seems so strange. And it's that kind of saying, if we create the problem and we already have the packaged solution, then that's maybe the hope. We've created the problem, maybe we have the solution. That's my only plus silver lining.
But I mean, one thing I want to say about all this, if you look at countries and you look at investment flows, then in general, capital moves to countries that are stable and growing and dynamic. And once you have countries with a government that is very questionable, I think it has an impact on the valuation of equities. That there's no question about, and also on the valuation of bonds and of currencies. And I think under the current administration, the US dollar has become very vulnerable. I think equities that are in the US highly priced compared to the rest of the world. They may be reasonably priced compared to zero interest rates, because that changes the game for everything. But they are highly priced compared to assets elsewhere, as is real estate and as is the cost of living. And I believe that when people really realize what the administration in the US is doing, that they will reevaluate whether one should pay such high valuations for an environment that is, or certainly seems to be, very anti-capitalistic. A growth company, for its growth, depends on an administration that is favorable to it becoming successful, and not on an administration and on a legislation that actually retards its growth.
Yes.
So for that reason, I have to say, I think the US market and US assets have become rather vulnerable.
We've certainly seen that in the last 30 days. Say, I think the Nasdaq's down 7%, the S&P is down 5 or 6% for the month, or trailing 30 days. We're coming into, we're in October, November. People are seeming a bit more gloomy as well. And you're Dr. Gloom, so we're talking to the right person.
Yes.
What should people be looking at right now? Because it's easy to find, we've got Evergrande, and that's falling apart. Where that rollout is going to look is huge. We've got inflation. We've got some supply chain issues. We've got a lot of problems that people are kind of going, okay, I see this is happening. What should we be looking at? What are some solutions, or how do we play this smart defensively? What's some suggestions that you would that you could put out right now?
Well, the first question people should ask is, why do we have some supply constraints? Why did they occur? Why are energy prices going up so much? The world decided to have clean energy. Does it use more energy or less energy? So you understand?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the problems you see today in the supply chain and in energy and in other commodities is actually government induced. Also in the labor market, as you know, there are some labor shortages in the US, although there's still plenty of people that don't work. Yeah. But I recently read an example and I wrote about this. The US had these lockdowns, as this did many other countries. So they locked down and they also closed the schools. And with the schools, they closed down kindergartens and daycare centers, okay? So if you have a family and they have 1 or 2 children that are aged between, say, 3 and 12 or 10 or whatever it is, if the daycare center closes, one of the parents has to stay home. And when the daycare centers close and they reopen later and much later, 30% go out of business. So the supply diminishes. Then the government comes in and tells the daycare center, oh, now, when the child comes in, you have to do this. When he goes out, you have to do that. And then. That has increased the cost of daycare centers by 47%. And then the prices of daycare centers go up. In other words, the cost for a family to send the children to daycare centers go up. And then one of the parents say to himself, well, what does it do to me if I go and work and have to pay higher costs for the daycare centers? Maybe I better stay home. This way, 5 million people are staying home to look after the children instead of sending them to daycare centers.
So what should, I mean, you speak highly of commodities. You talk about, precious metals. What would you suggest here as we wrap things up? Some ideas that people should have in October, November in the short term, looking through this really tumultuous time?
Well, I think people should have some cash. I mean, I know it's unpopular, but I have maybe 20% of my assets in cash.
Okay.
Because I believe no matter how you slice it, valuations are high. The second thing, I believe that nowadays when you invest, say you invest in pharmaceutical companies or you invest in utilities, the government's influence on these industries is huge. And I think investing becomes very difficult. The planning, the selection of stocks becomes very difficult when the government is planning. The government is now involved in everything, in micromanagement, in macromanagement. And as you know, the more the government is involved, the more corruption there is and so forth. So it's an environment that does not deserve the present valuations in the US. I'd say the valuations given, if I just look at the administration, and I said that already at the time of Obama, should be 50% lower.
Yes. So this is something
minimum. I'd 50%. Say a fair valuation would be 90% lower.
This is important, I think, for people to hear, because you don't hear a lot of people say, listen, you should maybe take some gains off the table if you had some gains in commodity stocks or in some other plays, maybe having some cash sitting on hand for the times ahead that are going to be difficult, but also to get you an entry point into some of these sectors moving forward when the dust settles to some extent. But when that dust settles, I don't know.
Yes, but I'd like to just point out that a lot of people don't have a lot of gains over the last 12 months because the indices were pushed up by just a handful of stocks.
Yeah.
And if I look at the number of S&P stocks above the 50-day moving average and above the 100-day moving average and the 200-day moving average, they've been shrinking all the time for the last 6 months. It means that the advance has not been broadening.
Yes.
It has been shrinking. And so I would be careful about this market. Actually, I'm just thinking of writing about what markets did in the early 1970s, because at that time, the market didn't collapse, but it rolled over slowly between the peak in 1968, 69 for some stocks. Then there was another peak in 1970 and another peak for some stocks in 73. But the number of stocks hitting new highs was shrinking all the time. And so we had this huge top formation between 69 and 73. And then we had a lengthy bear market in the 74, 2 years.
Yes.
But it was brutal.
Yes. Well, I mean, we're living in that, in a time where people are trying to contract, but at the same time, there's this contradiction of messages. Like you say, like tech stocks are trying to grow and we've got a global community at the same time, a lot of policy going, that doesn't seem like we're trying to encourage that. So it is a very strange time for people to go mixed messages everywhere.
But I would own some precious metals, but that is nothing new. I think someone who casually looks at the world and looks at central bankers, just look at the last 4 central bankers in the United States. None of them is trustworthy. That is the point. The capitalistic system came up during a time of Christianity. And the most important for a capitalistic system is that people respect the law. You and I, we agree to a contract. We sign a contract. Each has to perform. That is the basis of the capitalistic system is the legal system. Everybody condemns the capitalistic system, but they don't realize other countries, other civilizations had no legal basis for a capitalistic system. And under the capitalistic system, everybody bitches about it, but the fact is the world became richer than ever before, with the poverty rate everywhere declining.
Yes.
Everywhere. And then some people tell me that the life under the Soviet Union was so great. Yeah. There are many documentaries by famous artists. They all repeat the same thing. They said, under Stalin, you sometimes slept outside the door of your apartment because you didn't want to disturb your family if the KGB, the predecessor, came and picked you up. That's the conditions people lived under. Yes. And I've seen it with my own eyes because I went to Eastern Europe and Russia early on. But then there are professors and academics that say, oh, life was great under the Soviet Union. That's what the US should aim at. That should be the objective of the US.
Yes, and it's not hard to research. I mean, it's been an absolute failure each time it's being initiated, yet everything I hear from someone young is, that's not the real communism. You go, you've heard that before. Every single time it's not the real one. It ends up being the same thing. And there's nothing worse than crushing the human spirit and that will to drive and the goal to be better and to aim for higher.
Yes,
and that's an American
freedom.
Spirit.
It's called freedom.
Yes.
Freedom and democracy, capitalism and freedom. But, you know, anyone who says freedom and capitalism, they portray as someone who is vicious.
Yes.
Everybody who is an entrepreneur is suddenly a vicious guy.
Yeah, absolutely not true.
But, you know, they learned their lesson. I can tell you, before the Russian Revolution, where they slaughtered so many people, They thought, oh, this is great. It's going to be great. They learned their lesson. The lesson took a long time, 1918 to 1989. They had plenty of time to learn. And it's interesting, in the former Soviet Union, nobody wants to get close to socialism anymore. But in the rich Western spoiled world, run by wokes, brats, there you have a proliferation of ill-conceived socialist ideas. And let me repeat what Lenin said. Socialism, the objective of socialism is communism.
Yes.
The abolition of private property. Except, of course, for the people that run the business, the country.
Yes. It's quite a system. But we thank you, Dr. Faber, for being on. I really appreciate it. We always get to learn so much. I urge people to subscribe to your newsletter because the wealth of information, not only current, but your experience, as well as the depth of history in it, it's refreshing out there, and it's critical, especially in the times we're facing today, which are, if there's one positive note whenever I get a bit stressed out, I say these are remarkable times. They are absolutely remarkable times.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Faber.
Okay, thanks a lot.